let's move into component 4 and do just a big overview and a jump start to sort of get you mentally jump started on the road to completing component 4 successfully. I'll share my screen. I've developed some slides to give you an overview of 4, and as always, we start with the weight. So component 4 is worth 15% of your total score. Just as a refresher, component 1 is 40%, 2 is 15, 3 is 30, 4 is 15. Do not be deceived by this 15%. You still need to do really, really well on this. All of them, of course, you want to do your very best. Your students deserve it, and of course you deserve it. But this 15% sometimes is misleading to candidates because they think, well, this may not take a lot of my time. Well, as we dig further into this, you'll see that that's not going to be the case. So let's, as always, look at the title of the component. They all have a title. And the title of component 4 is effective and reflective practitioner. So you'll be scored on your effectiveness and reflectiveness as a practitioner. So, you know, what makes this different? Aren't you always supposed to be an effective practitioner and a reflective practitioner, even in the other components? Well, yes, but this one is slightly different, and you'll see that as we move on into this overview. So you're given the opportunity to highlight your abilities as an effective and reflective practitioner in developing and applying your knowledge of your students. So this is interesting because you're going to develop your knowledge of your students and apply it. And let's see what exactly the National Board means by that. So to develop the knowledge of students. This is not just, I'll do an internet search and I'll see, I'll learn more about 8-year-olds. No, this is your own particular students, and what you're showcasing here is how you build your knowledge of them. So you will gather information from a variety of sources, about a group of students. So choose a group of your students, and you're going to showcase here for us and tell the National Board how you gather information about them from a variety of sources. You're going to use assessments to plan for and positively impact their learning, these students that you're describing here. And you're going to provide evidence of your collaboration with families and caregivers, the community, and colleagues. Okay, so evidence of your collaboration with families and caregivers, community, and colleagues. You don't get to choose. And we'll talk more about that later. And evidence of your contributions to learning communities to advance students' learning and growth. This is not just, I took a course, I read a book. It's your contributions to learning communities, not just what you get from being a part of a learning community, but what are your contributions to that learning community, and how does it advance students' learning and growth? And of course, we could tease apart all the elements here, and we would see that this overview is tightly connected to the 5 core propositions. So in a nutshell, there are 5 elements to this component. And here are the 5 elements: knowledge of your students, generation and use of assessment data, participation in learning communities, collaboration within these elements, and reflection. And we'll take a closer look at each one of these 5 elements. Knowledge of students. Well, of course, you're going to read your certificate-specific standard for knowledge of students very closely. And then the National Board asks you to use multiple sources of information, multiple sources to gather information about a group of your students: families, colleagues and school specialists, prior teachers, observational data, cumulative records or files, professionals in the field, assessment data, community resources that may affect the school and or the students. So you must show in your writing, this is all in the directions, you must show in your writing that you used at least 2 of the following, at least 2 of these: families, colleagues, professionals in the district or in the field, and other community members. 2, at least. That doesn't mean that you can't use all of them, or 3 or 4, but you must use at least 2 of those. And then more about knowledge of students. Specific information could come from emails. So print and save your emails this year, ongoing anecdotal notes that you take, surveys, a communication log that includes all of your communication, progress charting. Okay, so remember the nutshell? So we just looked at knowledge of students. Now let's look at generation and use of assessment data. And so you're going to have to actually submit materials with your component. You'll upload them to your ePortfolio, and those materials have to be connected with one formative and one summative assessment. So a formative and a summative. Read your standards closely to understand the difference. And so you could use a teacher-made or ready-made assessment. The assessments have to be appropriate for students that you're profiling. They have to produce results that are accurate and reliable. And they have to produce information that contributes to student learning. So not just that gives you data on student learning, but what you learn helps you contribute to student learning. And remember, assessment is for learning. It's not for a grade. You don't assess so you can give somebody a grade. You assess so that you as the teacher will know how you can further improve the student's learning. So you assess to inform your instructional decisions. And so what do you generate and what do you use? Both of these words are important. Well, you're going to generate 1 formative assessment, 1 summative assessment, and 3 self-assessments. Self-assessment means student self-assessments. Let's look further into this. And right now you're probably thinking, stop, too much information. Remember, this is an overview, big picture overview. We're going to help you delve more deeply into each of these. I'm just trying to give you some idea so you can your ideas can start churning in your head. I know your wheels are turning now because you're teachers, and so you're thinking. So what stands out with formative assessment? Here's a definition of it. Formative assessments are conducted during the learning process in order to modify teaching and learning experiences to improve student learning. It's not a pretest because pretest happens before, right? And it's not a post-test. A post-test happens after, but it's something that happens, here's something that stands out, during learning so that you can modify your teaching. You can modify students' learning experiences to improve student learning. So it's during learning for the purpose of modifying, okay? Here are some examples of formative assessments. You can also just Google it, and better yet, Google Scholar it. Go to Google and then click, there's something that says more, and you go to Google Scholar and just really learn all about formative assessment. But here are some quick examples: observation, running records, quick writes, KWL charts, warm-up problem, games, exercises. So remember, it's not like a post-test or a pre-test or anything like that. It's some of the things that you see here on this screen. If you want to stop this video, take a picture of it, then you can do that. And so summative assessment, what stands out here? The goal of a summative assessment is to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional sequence or unit by comparing it against a standard. So what stands out here is it's at the end, okay? And always based on your standard. So here are some examples of that: portfolios, performances, final projects, end of unit assessment. And you could also use, you could use things like a midterm, a district benchmark, a term paper, a state mandated or district mandated assessment. You could use some of those things that you don't create, but just remember your purpose and what you're using the data for. And then there are self-assessments, okay? Self-assessments encourage students to reflect on their learning experiences. They allow um, teachers to tap into student thinking. Feedback and self-assessment can address fairness, equity, and diversity standard. But the key here is self-assessment occurs when students judge their own work to improve their performance. Okay? And the self-assessment should always align with the goals of the learning. All right. So some self-assessment examples could be like when you have kids write at the end of a class period, 3 things I learned, like an exit ticket. It could be a teacher-student conference where you're asking students to assess their learning and to set goals. It could be a checklist, a KWL, or if you let kids self-assess using a rubric. And it looks a lot like formative assessment, and it is some of the same things. The difference is whether you're using it to assess student learning or students are using it to assess their own learning and to set goals for improvement. And so all of you have, no matter what certificate area, you have a standard or a portion of a standard that talks about assessment. Dig into that. Mark the important points, and in the margins write, what does this look like in my practice? And then think, what do I need to do to improve my practice, my assessment practices, to make it more aligned to the National Board standard for assessment? So I looked through several of your standards from several certificate areas, the assessment standard, and everything here on this slide are examples that I found of different types of assessments. So like if you're math, all of these won't be in yours, but some of them will be. If you're science, all of these won't be in yours, but some of them will be. If you're music or reading or PE or, whatever it is, all of these won't be specific to you, but some of them will be. So take a picture of this, pause the video, save it somewhere. But again, this is just from my reading of your standards and finding examples there. Okay, so now we're down to 3, participating in learning communities. So remember, one of the things you have to show is how you participate in learning communities. They can either be within your school or district or beyond it. It can be a professional organization, a book study group, your grade level PLC, a pedagogical PLC, which that just means it's not your grade level. It's based on everybody who wants to learn how to do small group instruction or digital technology or, some sort of pedagogical focus rather than a grade level. It can be a pickup PLC formed around a topic of study. Let's say you all want to study how to help students be more, have longer attention spans or something. And you send out an email and you say, hey, I want to study this thing. Who wants to study with me? It can be an online group or blog or discussion board. It could be face-to-face. It could be digital, like even worldwide. But the bottom line is it addresses a professional learning need. And so here's how these things are all connected. Remember, we talked about developing your knowledge of students, collaborating with others, how you use assessment, how you participate in learning communities, and they should all be connected. So all of this, your collaboration and your learning community should be based on what you learned about your students through these assessments. Okay. So further down in this module, you'll learn more about the rubric. But for now, this was just an overview. So you can see how much it is. It may feel like you've been drinking from a fire hydrant here. It may seem overwhelming, but again, don't panic. This is just the big picture overview, and you're going to be diving in and looking more closely at each one of those little details as you move through this module.